Well, let's
Well,
get into it, man.
yeah, I'm
So,
excited.
uh, so Stephen Butcher, Coach Butcher Barbell, correct?
Correct.
Give us a little information about you, kind of your background, like where you started in weightlifting, and what kind of got you to where you're at today.
Sure. I'm a say it now because I finally can. Like I said, Coach of Butcher Barbell. Just completed my master's in kinesiology. Graduated this past weekend, actually, from
Congrats.
UNCC. Thank you, sir. Um, I have my bachelor's in exercise science, also from UNCC. Um, National level coach with USA Weightlifting. I started with weightlifting. How I got into the sport was through CrossFit, and it was kind of a
Mhm.
weird path to get there. So I did a little bit of powerlifting in high school, but my main focus in high school was I really just wanted to not be ugly and fat. I just wanted to be ugly. So I started with the muscle and fitness magazines a lot. Just finding workouts in there, trying to be a bodybuilder. That led me to the high school powerlifting team, and I was in a really small high school. Like my graduating class was 30. The total enrollment was like 200. Like
Wow.
tiny high school. So I kind of picked up, did a powerlifting meet in high school and bombed out on bench like everybody does when you're a teenager and you think you bench more than you actually do. That led me, the idea of being strong led me to MMA. I did MMA, particularly Muay Thai. I was more than anything better than Jiu Jitsu, better than any of the grappling stuff. I was really good at Muay Thai and did that from 2005 up until about 2011. And then during that journey is where I found CrossFit. And immediately as I found CrossFit, I began drinking the Kool Aid super hard for like 3 years and then saw all the problems with CrossFit and then fell in love with weightlifting. And that can be like my opinions of the problem with CrossFit can be like a whole nother podcast. I don't think it's a bad thing. I actually think when it's done right, it's the best like general program for folks that are on the couch and are not going to do the movements we know produce the best like fitness and force output and all that stuff. Like your choice is not do them or go to a CrossFit gym and learn them. Like that's the
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're not a high school or a college athlete working with a coach, like you're not exposed to the Olympic lifts or kettlebells or these other like true, really high intensity workouts. So CrossFit kind of brings that to the masses, and I think that's a good thing. But um, I think there's other things that CrossFit can do better. I don't think it's a failed system, but I do think it can do some things better anyway. So I found CrossFit. CrossFit led me to weightlifting, and this is kind of where the story really picks up on weightlifting. Is right around 2010. I was still fighting, doing Muay Thai stuff, but CrossFit did and I don't know if you remember this. It was the USA Weightlifting CrossFit Open event. It was on at the Olympic Training Center. It
Oh
was a
shit.
3 day. It was a 3 day event, and what they did is it was a sanctioned weightlifting meet uh, followed by a CrossFit workout. It was a 10-minute AMRAP style workout with some cleans, some pull ups, and some double unders. And they had some big names in it, like Chad Vaughn did it. Like there's a
Hmm.
video of Chad Vaughn attempting to do double unders. Sorry, Chad. But I know those double unders did not go your way. Uh, but I watched it live and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And it was a two platform meet and they ran, it was like 300 lifters. It took them 3 days to run it. And we're talking dark ages of weightlifting still.
Hmm.
Before this event, USA Weightlifting's membership was like 1,500. Like
Hmm.
total members was 1,500, and then after this event, it doubled to 3,000. And then by
Hmm.
the end of the year, it had gone all the way up to like 6,000 or something like that. It was like this exponential doubling or exponential growth for USA Weightlifting in a
Hmm.
very short period of time. Well, that event encouraged uh, people that liked weightlifting a lot, but were in kind of the CrossFit space to revive weightlifting, at least here in the North Carolinas. So a guy named Peter Haas revived the Carolina, what used to be known as the LWC, local weightlifting committee. and then held the first state championships on record for a long period of time in 2011. Uh,
Mm.
he also hosted the first meet that I ever did, which was the Triad Barbell Open. And yes, I remember the meet name. I even remember who I lifted with and what I lifted, um, in February 2011. And I did that meet, and by the magic of barely anybody being there, I took a bronze medal. And
Mhm.
I was like, oh, cool. Well, I've never medaled in CrossFit or, done well or podiumed in CrossFit. Screw CrossFit. I'm gonna go do this weightlifting thing because I like shiny objects. And the rest was kind of history. Got my USAW level one in that same year, 2011. I took it from the late and great Clem Pendlay,
Mm.
who was the biggest influence on my weightlifting career, hands down, and the story. Um, so I took it from him. There were 40 some odd people at my USAW level one. For reference, I'm a USAW level one and two instructor now. Um, my typical course is 12.
Mhm.
So we had 40 freaking people at this thing, which, like, I had taken obviously my CrossFit level one and all that. And there was like 80 people at my CrossFit level one. So I thought it was normal. I didn't realize how absurd that was.
Mhm.
Um, so did that. And I'll speed the story up here a little bit because, I don't want to take up the whole podcast with my bio, but did that, kept competing. Had a really rapid rise in numbers after my level one because I really understood how to lift at that point. Uh, Started winning a lot of meets, including like some state championship meets, which I thought were really cool. I know everybody kind of laughs at state championships, but I'm like, hey, listen,
Hey,
as
it
the king,
matters.
as the king of the local meets, the king of the worst, the
Yeah.
best of the worst, as I say it. That was kind of cool for me. Kicked out to Colorado, got my level two, and also led a weightlifting team for the first time, and that's kind of where Butcher Barbell
Mm.
was born. Was in 2015 in Colorado, um, and I wound up coaching. I had a team of about 30 people that I took to the state championship meet there. It wasn't my gym, so like the gym was struggling and was in a place where it could basically no longer support itself in Colorado. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall for the facility and where it was going with the owner. So I came back to North Carolina, took a job, came back to Charlotte, and then the only way for me to continue coaching was to go full remote, and that's what I did.
Mm.
And I came back to Charlotte in 2016, and from 2016 to now, I started with about three or four remote athletes, something like that, and had a full time job on the other end. And Butcher Barbell was just like this thing that kept me connected to the sport that I loved and coaching, which is what I really loved. To now, I've got 26 athletes, all remote, plus an additional coach, Olga Pizarski, who you've met at some of the meets, who her athletes represent Butcher Barbell, and she is basically the other coach on the team.
Hmm.
And she now has opened her own gym, and we all represent, Butcher Barbell and the team together when we go to meets, which is really cool. So she's got an additional, I think, 12 athletes. So we're 37, 38 athletes strong on our roster,
Wow.
which is really cool for a completely remote team.
Yeah.
I athletes can come and they can get in-person training from me in my little garage, but we are basically a 100% remote operation, and you know we'll we're doing some cool things, and it's very little. I want to preface all of this. It's very little of what I did. I
Mhm.
was in a constant meeting the right people at the right time, and for some reason they liked me, and now they're my amazing athletes. And or I can't even say they're mine. Like, I am the coach that gets to coach these amazing athletes.
Yeah.
Is really how I view it. They are the whole reason for my success. Like, and I'll say it throughout the entire podcast. I have no idea how I'm this lucky to have this group of 37 athletes, 38 athletes,
Yeah.
um, trusting me to to take them to meets and help them. So
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Yeah. That's dude, that's the dream, honestly. I didn't realize that you were fully remote. I know you knew you did a
mhm.
lot of work, but I thought you had a physical space, which I mean, I guess you have the garage, like you said, to do like
Yep.
personal training
I've
and
got
stuff.
the I've got the garage and I do personal training out of there, and we'll do one of the really cool things, and this is one of the things I love about the sport so much, is the community aspect. And
Yeah.
again, I think that's so many people gravitate toward weightlifting from CrossFit because they love the community aspect of CrossFit, but they hate um, the unpredictability or the injury
Yeah.
prone practices that can occur. Um, and when they find weightlifting, they still find a community that's super strong. Like
Yeah.
the community with weightlifting is, as in my opinion, as strong as the communities that you'll find in CrossFit gyms, which is one of the benefits of CrossFit. Um,
Yeah.
is
That's
that
so
community?
So that's something that I've been trying. So that's something that I've kind of run into with the remote coaching because I am completely remote as well. I do have some athletes that are like here. I'm in Indiana now, so I've got some athletes that are like close, and we'll do some in-person training. But it is primarily remote coaching, and something that I'm trying to facilitate more, like with my athletes and my team, is this community, right? Because we've got people, and I've got people in Utah, I've got people in Alabama, Tennessee, out east, like they're all over the place. So how do you like facilitate that like community between athletes that are in different places training all over the place? So like how do you do that with your team? Is everyone like there in North Carolina or do you have
Oh
like
no.
people all over?
Surprisingly, so I'm based out of Charlotte, North Carolina right now. With me graduating, I don't know quite where I'll wind up, but I am determined to stay inside of the Carolinas because I'm a member of the Carolina WSO.
Hmm.
Um, I'm on the board for that. Um, so for me, there's a couple of things that I do. One is we've got, and I think every remote team does this. We've got a big group chat, and we keep it pretty active.
Hmm.
Um, we use Facebook for it right now, and I may eventually switch to something else like a WhatsApp or something. And it's not for them to submit their videos to review, though. If they hit a lift they're really proud of, I want them submitting it in there so the team cheers them on.
Hmm.
I have other ways that they submit videos for review, and I can talk about that. Um, but the group chat is for me to facilitate conversation between the members. Today, the topic was off-season training and why did my quads hurt. Um, and if you're in off-season and your quads don't hurt, you're doing something wrong. Um, so that was the group chat's a big part of it. And then also in the group chat, one of the things I do is every week I post a skill or a thought of, and this is a more recent thing. And again, it's a
Hmm.
constantly active thing to keep the community going. Um, but there are everybody gets their own program. There are certain moves that everybody winds up having at some point. So I'll post an instructional if it's a movement that I label it something, or it's a movement that doesn't have an official name. I'll be like, hey, this is what I mean when I put this in your program. Here's a
Hmm.
video. Here's what to focus on. Here's the accessory lift, or here's the main lift. Or I'll do I got one of the things that I see done wrong a lot by athletes is high pulls. So I did a whole
Hmm.
review and like, hey, here are the big things on high pulls that we're not just yanking the bar with our arms. Like there's specific things that I'm looking for from you when you execute the high pull. So I did like a 5-minute video and put that into the group chat, and that helps a lot. The other thing that helps is I'll try to do team trainings
Hmm.
where we'll get everybody together. I'm able to average about once a quarter right now. And I have to shout out Heavy Metal Barbell because I'll usually do it a lot, most of the time, jointly with Heavy Metal Barbell.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of videos of us doing that on my Instagram, on the team's Instagram. But Sean and Taylor with Heavy Metal Barbell, Sean Rigsby and Taylor Harris Rigsby, they have the biggest facility in Charlotte and maybe even in North Carolina that's weightlifting dedicated.
Hmm.
And they're really good friends of mine. So we pop out there and say, hey, can we drop in, plan a Saturday, and we'll all come in. And then afterwards, we'll all go get dinner. And we've done that a number of times. Um, and that is a way for us to build some pretty heavy community. And then the final piece is we do meets together is the big one.
Hmm.
So my athletes, like, this isn't, I'm not telling them, hey, you can only do these meets. But what I am saying to them is like, hey, these are the meets that we're going to plan to do together. and this can lower cost, and we'll all go and live at an Airbnb for a meet, or we'll go and we'll travel together, things like that. And that made like the trip to the Arnold this year
Mhm.
uh, was like six of us in an Airbnb, and it was one of the best bonding experiences I had with that group. Of all of us staying in the Airbnb, and the not just the way that everybody lifted amazing in an amazing way, but also the fact that we had this really deep bonding experience in the Airbnb, and laughed until we cried type of thing. It was super cool.
Yeah.
So those are some of the tools that I use to build community. The other thing, um, and again, some of these topics you have to shut me up on, but I think one of the big things too is I am really tight with controlling the culture and the people that I want in the
Mm.
team.
Mhm.
I rarely, if ever, deny anybody, but there have been conversations that I've had with some people, and I've said, "Listen, I don't know if I'm the coach for you.
Mhm.
Um, Here is my recommendation of somebody that might be able to fit a little bit more of what you're looking for." And I think being able to stop some of the like things that can be cancerous to the culture at the door is
Mhm.
really important for building community. I again going back to the team that I have now, I don't have any cancers now. I don't see it now. And if I do, somebody brings it to me, and then we perform a little bit of team chemo, right? I have the conversation with them, and I'm like, hey, listen, like you can't be doing this or saying this or treating people like this. I
Yeah.
try really hard to make sure things aren't politically motivated. It's
Mm.
no secret. Like my political affiliations are no secret, but I also am very clear with my team, like, hey, we are an open team to everybody. Period. End of story. You do not have to agree with anyone like, politically
Mhm.
or socially. Like that's fine. We have like this is an open door policy. Period. End of story. Everyone's welcome until they do something or they say something that makes them unwelcome. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and I have had to fire athletes before,
Hmm.
and because they were becoming a real problem, and multiple people were messaging me like, hey, this, I know we're remote and it's only a group chat, but this is really concerning to me. I'm
Yeah.
afraid to go to a meet with this person.
Hmm.
And I didn't like doing it. I didn't want to do it. I made sure I set them up with a coach. I would usually, even if they only have 1 day left on their month of programming that they bought from me, I'll refund that month of programming to make sure there's no hurt feelings, things like
Mhm.
that. But those are some things I do to build the community and then to keep the community safe too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that a lot. And um I agree with you on the same thing where like to me I don't like to turn down people if someone comes to me and they're like, "Hey, I want to get better at weightlifting. I want to work with you." Generally, I'll take most people on. But not every athlete is going to be a good match for every coach, right? And that's like I was working with Steve a few years ago when I was down in Tennessee. And the first thing I did when I reached out to him, I was like, "Hey, I'm interested in like, coaching." And he's like, "Okay, cool." He's like, "I don't know if I can help you." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I don't know." He's like, we'll give it a shot, but like if you ever feel like this isn't the right move for you and you got to do something else, he's like, "You got to do that. And you got to look out for
Yeah,
like what's best for you." And that was kind of shocking to me. I was like, "Oh, this is this like high level coach that's like very decorated and he's saying I may not be the right fit for you, but it's true, right? Like you can be the best, most thoughtful, well-educated coach in the world. And like if the culture, if your philosophy doesn't fit with like the athlete or you just don't vibe, like, they may not be able to get the most out of it, where they may be able to get more working with like a different coach.
yeah. And I've had athletes come to me from other coaches, and I made them a lot better. I've had athletes leave me and go to other coaches and get a lot better.
Hmm.
Um, I have had the opposite happen. I've had athletes come to me, and my style of coaching or programming didn't quite fit, and they weren't able. They stagnated a little bit. Um, and I've had athletes leave me and go to other coaches, and then at other with other coaches, they stagnated from the progress they were seeing with me. So, um, I think it very much is a puzzle piece. You have to find the puzzle piece or the puzzle that you fit in
Right.
with your coach. And I think every coach has the ability to coach everybody. I don't think every coach has the ability to coach everybody successfully.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very fair. Cool. So take me through the process. So you've got a new athlete who's like reaching
Hmm.
out to you and they want to start working with you. Take me through the process of what onboarding looks like because currently I'm actually going through and like kind of revamping and like redoing the whole I'm creating the whole journey, right? From like step one, athlete reaches out to me, we schedule our onboarding call, we go through the whole process to get them set up for success in terms of training. So, what does that look like for you and your athletes when you've got someone new that comes on board?
That's a great question, and I am constantly trying to improve this process to better create their program when they come in. The first thing I usually do is obviously a consult call. I'm a remote coach, so if I can get a FaceTime or a Zoom call, I want that more than anything. But I'll do a phone call with them, and I try to get their entire life story. Like, you know, what's your background like? What's your weightlifting like? What's your career like? What injuries have you had? What's your current program look like? Have you ever had a weightlifting program? Are you coming into a like as much information as I can? I try to let them info dump, and I just take notes the whole time. Like anything that they think could be pertinent to weightlifting, uh, I try to get out of them, and that is stuff like I said, past injuries, medical issues. If I've worked with an athlete uh, for a period of time. She was a type 1 diabetic, and then she's back to doing CrossFit. She did her weightlifting thing, and she's back into CrossFit. But like having an understanding of intensity and having breaks in her workout. So if she needed to get sugar, she could get sugar to continue her training, things like that. So any medical issues, medical history, I can grab out of them, and then I begin to go into because it is a custom program. Okay, what are you looking for out of your program? So what's your ability for training? Like what's your availability for training? How long, how often, and what's the frequency that you can do and that you want to do? Are you able
Hmm.
to train 6 days a week? And is that what you want to do?
Hmm.
Would you prefer to train 4 days a week or 3 days a week? What other things are you doing? Are you a mom with kids? And do we have to schedule training around when kids are in school? And therefore, we've got to keep it short enough or keep things structured so that if you may have to miss accessories someday because your kids get sick at school and you have to go pick them up, which I just had an athlete do that this entire week. Like her one kid got sick one day and had to be picked up, and then the next day it was the other kid. Um, so making sure that I've got all of those sorted out, and then with that, I also go into what is your equipment availability. What
Hmm.
equipment do you have to train with? Do you only have a bar and some plates and a squat rack? Because if you don't at least have that, I can't work with you. If you don't have
Hmm.
at least, a barbell that, a decent rotating barbell, Olympic lifting barbell, some plates that you can drop and somewhere you can squat. Like until we sort that out, there's nothing I can do for you. And I don't mean like they just have to have access to it. They don't need to
Right.
purchase it and buy it. They just need access to it. And then what I usually do is give them homework. I want everything that they told me on the call because I want them to have some skin in the game out of the gate. Is I tell them, hey, all right, now what I need from you is an email. And in that email, I want you to put down some goals and I want you to make them smartly, the acronym SMART, specific,
Hmm.
measurable, attainable, relevant, and time oriented. Uh, I want those goals. I want your current maxes of every lift that you can possibly think of because you never know what I'm going to throw at you that I'm going to want to base a percentage off of. Um, and then the list of equipment you have available, and then I sign them up. And this is they've decided to come on board, and then I sign them up for the video review app so that they have somewhere to put their videos for me to review, and then I have them take a video of their snatch and their clean and jerk just as it is, and put some videos in there for me to know what I'm starting with. And then a week after I get all of that is when they get their first program.
Mm,
because it takes me about a week to process that information and crank the first program out. So that's my typical onboarding now.
gotcha. Gotcha. And what do you use for that video review? What app do you
It's
use?
called Coach. It's called Coach Now. It's a yearly subscription. I think it's like 350 or 375. It's not cheap, but the value that it adds is absolutely ridiculous. Um, it
Hmm.
operates, and it's cool because it operates
I'm paying
a
like
lot like.
I'm paying like over 500 for Train Heroic a year.
Well,
So
so Coach Now is just the video review app.
yeah, yeah.
It's not how I get the
Oh,
programming out to them.
gotcha, gotcha. Okay.
So the programming, because I'm old school and I also get really detailed in a lot of my descriptions,
Mm-hmm.
my programming's all still through Google Docs.
Gotcha.
Um, and I hear a lot of coaches now cringe when I'm like, yeah, I'm still sending out Google Docs, and they just get a live update every Sunday with their workout. Um, and that and nothing against the apps like Train Heroic or Team Builder or I forget the other one,
True Coach.
um, True Coach. Like I think they're all great, and I've been on both ends of those apps.
Mm-hmm.
Just the way that I tend to write my programs and the descriptions I try to do. When I try to do it through the apps, it slows me down and doesn't speed me up.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Like it
Yeah.
takes me longer to write it through an app than it does. And let me just get this all into the Google Doc and blast this out.
I I
Um,
I kind of like that. And like I'm almost like just talking through this, I'm like considering going back to something like that because here's my problem with Train Heroic. So it's very easy to use, right? It's very user
yeah.
friendly. You can put videos in there. So I can create videos
Mhm,
of the complexes and that's attached to the movement. The
mhm,
movement can be attached to another movement. So say it's a snatch pull, I can attach it to the snatch so that the percentage is based off of the 1 rep max snatch.
mhm,
And it's easy for athletes to just upload videos to the app. I provide analysis and feedback. So that side of things is very good. But there's certain metrics that I like to track, especially if someone's like dealing with pain. I want to know the average intensity of pain. I want to be able to track that over time. I want to know for certain things RPE, like how hard did this feel for you, and like your readiness to train. And so it does track certain metrics. It asks you a bunch of questions at the beginning, like how sore are you? What's your readiness? Like what was your sleep like? But for me, there's other things, other metrics that I want to track that I can't through the app. And so like having a Google Sheet, I could basically, I'm doing that with some of these other metrics now currently. And so that could be like an all-in-one thing where it's like program gets published there and you also input like your scores for like these different metrics and make it easier to kind of visualize.
yeah, and that's one of the things that I don't do enough of is tracking certain
Mm-hmm.
things. I'll track kind of ad hoc certain things, but one of the things I think I can get a lot better at is tracking of um, like daily training and what they're doing every day to collect that data. And I definitely don't collect enough data for what they're doing outside of like just we're making this percentage of improvement over time. You just
Right.
made a 13 kilo total PR. Okay, that's a big deal. Like that type of stuff.
Right.
Um, so I like that aspect of the apps that it tracks it all for you. The funny thing with Train Heroic is all of the founders and creators of that app I coached in Colorado.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were working out. So the gym I
Yeah.
was at was a place called Flatirons. Unfortunately, like I said, it's not there anymore. We saw the writing on the wall. But while I was there, and Train Heroic is Boulder based, and that's where I was, they would all come in, and that's where they trained and worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the first ever, Butcher Barbell programs were published in Train Heroic,
Hmm.
and I'm sure if you dig far back enough, you could find them. I just again, I think the Google Docs just worked better for me,
Mm-hmm.
and that was as far as getting the detail in the program out that I want, I really like the Google Docs. The tracking stuff, I think all of the apps do a little bit better for tracking tonnage and things over the weeks. Um, makes it a lot easier. And then
But
the one,
it's tough because like it'll because like how do you track a complex, right? Like how do you label a complex, right? If you're doing a
yeah.
two snatch pulls plus snatch plus overhead squat, right? Is that 4 reps? Is that 1 rep? Right. And so like and like how do you track like I mean do you so how do you track volume at all? Do you track number of lifts? Like do you have
So
any data for like
I track
volume?
I track through my workouts, and it's not so much that I track retroactively, like kind of like what Train Heroic does, where it's like, okay, this is how much you've done this whole week or this whole block or whatever.
Mhm.
I progressively look at what they're going to be doing. So I'll base, if they're doing 90%, they're only, this is their upper limit of repetitions. If they're doing 85%, here's their upper limit of repetitions, or here's the upper lip per set, per workout, that type of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, the baseline that, for instance, USA weightlifting gives is no more than 30 repetitions, including warm-up weights or warm-up
Mhm.
lifts per workout for the Olympic lifts, right? That's
Mhm.
their baseline. And I don't adhere to it strictly, but like if let's say we're snatching that day and we're doing snatch doubles, and let's say they've got 5 doubles at 85%, right? So, and that's 10 reps right there. And let's say they're doing an additional 5 sets or 6 sets to warm up to their 85%. So that's another 12. That's 22 reps on snatch for that day. We're inside of that 30 window, right? So I look at it like that when I'm building the workout, I'm like building it out.
Mhm.
Um, and I make those considerations uh, for like how much volume in this workout am I having compared to intensity. And then I keep the volume and intensity obviously inversely related. Intensity goes up, volume comes down, workouts get shorter. Um, so I not so much tracking, but I'm structuring in that
Yeah.
manner of uh, each each workout, and then each week, how much am I doing for each movement, depending on where they are in their cycle. you know I may not want them, to snatch, clean and jerk, squat, press and pull 5 days a week. Like it's typically not going to be built like that, which is how the old programs were built, right? Like
Mhm.
even as recently as 2015, when I went through my USAW level 2, it was, hey, every workout is, you should have a snatch, a clean, a jerk, a squat, a pull, a press, exercise, in every single workout. That's just what you do. And you have one of those movements, and your pull might be kettlebell swings because it's a hinging
Mm.
movement that could count as a pull, and your squat might be your overhead squats instead of like heavy front or back squats, and your press might be an accessory style dumbbell press. Like, but that's how they structured every single workout. And I've moved away from structuring it in that manner. Like maybe I only want them snatching 3 times a week or cleaning twice a week out of 5 training days. Maybe I only want them
Mhm.
snatching once a week. Right now everybody's in kind of their off season, so they're only snatching, cleaning, and jerking twice a week for each. So,
Mm.
Mondays they get some snatch, Wednesdays they get some clean and jerk, uh, Fridays they get snatch, clean, and jerk. Complexes, nothing's looking like it's just coming from the floor. It's just a regular old clean and jerk single. Everything's complexes. That's just kind of how their off season looks. And then an absolute shit ton of hypertrophy and bodybuilding work. So
Mhm.
like during their off season, everything's looking between like as light as 65% for their Olympic lifts, which again, I throw numbers like that out there and everybody's like, oh, well, weightlifting doesn't matter unless it's under 80% or 75% or whatever. And I'm like, you don't matter because your athlete bombed out at your last meet, so you should stop talking. And then,
Reps below 80% don't count.
yeah, right. Um, and I'm like, yeah, that's cute. My athlete beat yours at competition. So what do you say now? And then I'd say that all tongue in cheek, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, but the idea is like you're programming and you're doing everything based on for that, like on the season you're in. And I know we
Mm,
veered off of the tracking idea, but that like it's for me, what's more important than tracking is the structure of the workout.
yeah.
And then you have to do one of the things I think coaches uh, that are super analytical with tracking stuff lose sight of is a big part of what you're tracking is how they're moving.
Right.
if
Right.
what if what you're programming isn't improving how they're moving, then not just the weight they're moving, but like are the complexes you're giving them correcting the errors in their lifting that you need it to correct? No, because you're paying more attention to the tonnage over the course of the week than you are. And again, the tonnage over the course of the week is super important. I need to track that better as a coach. It's one of the
Yeah.
things that as I become a more educated coach, that's a super important thing for me. But if your athletes lift from the floor to the knee, if the bar moves forward as it breaks off the floor, going from the floor to the knee, and it did that 6 months ago, and now it's still doing that today, then whatever tonnage you're giving them over the course of the week doesn't freaking matter because they are still going to be humping the shit out of the bar once it gets to the hip as if it was their drunken prom date.
Hmm.
So can we fix that too? Like, can we get some really heavy importance on that too? And I think that's my program is structured. If I were to say the flaw in my program, it's structured too much on improving the movements and not enough
Mm,
on tracking them.
yeah.
Um, but I still believe that I track them enough and they are getting enough volume to get a stimulus response. And the reason why I say that is, we just took the whole team to a meet and everybody had a meet PR.
Hmm.
I've got one kid who's my youth athlete, which is kind of cheating when we use his numbers. And this is also why I don't track stuff as strictly because I've watched him, but he's added 75 kilos to his total in 10 months.
Wow.
Like, yeah, but he's also 16 years old, peak of
Right.
puberty,
Yeah. Yeah.
eating everything. His parents are texting me and like, hey, so can can we like change this because we're gonna go broke and we're spending his college
Yeah.
fund on his food. No,
Yeah.
but seriously, like that's a cheat code when you are 16 years old because you're basically on steroids naturally, right?
Right.
And then you're taking you're taking in 3,000 calories, and then all you have to have is the right kid who's just super dedicated, which this kid is, and
Yeah.
bada bing, bada boom, you've got a 70-kilo total improvement in 10 months.
Yeah. That's
So,
that. So that is also something that I'm trying to address as well, which I'm having a little bit of I don't think there's any way to do this super effectively, which is track technique, right? What are your metrics for tracking technique? We, as a coach, we can sit there and we can go, oh, look, this is where you were 3 months ago. This is where you are now. I can see a subjective difference in your lifts, right? But how do you operationalize that, right? So what I'm trying to do is basically um, create almost like this formulaic thing where it's like, all right, these are the phases of the lift. These are the points of performance. Can we go through and like check the boxes on like all these things? Where's the breakdown occurring? How do we address that? And then how do we measure progress in that movement? Right. So that's something I'm struggling with is like, how do I operationalize that tracking of like technical progress? Because you're right, the tonnage, the volume, the number of lifts is very uh, cut and dry, black and white, but technique is a little bit more subjective.
yeah, I don't know if you can objectify it, I think, or operationalize it. And if you find a way, let me know. But I can definitely see the doctor coming out and Dr. Stegelmann. So,
Mm,
um, and I think that trying to because it's always a moving target. Here's the
right.
problem: it's a constant moving target, and one of the athletes that I've coached the longest. I've worked with her 8 years. I'm gonna leave her name out of it, but I think everybody can put two and two together, figure out who it is if they know me. We are completely rebuilding and revamping our lifting right now,
Mm,
and a big part of the problem with making it too formulaic for tracking technique, other than tracking the number of misses that you have in a workout and the number of misses you have at a competition. Like that can be formulaic very easily. Like,
right.
hey, like I've got a guy, I'll drop his name, but his name's Nate. He's a master's lifter. He's still within his first year of lifting. And his first competition he went to and he did 3 for 6. And I was like, cool. So we got to improve on this because this is not going to fly, right? Yeah, last 3 competitions, he's done 6 for 6 and has systematically improved by 1 kilo on both, by 1 to 3 kilos on both of his lifts and
Mm.
his total every single meet while going 6 for 6. And moving up. And again, he's a master's lifter. So whenever if you get a 1 kilo PR on a master's lifter, it's like a 20 kilo PR on, a youth
Mm.
athlete. Like it's that hard to claw for kilos.
Right.
Um, so he's done that systematically each time. So that's really easy to track. Um, but going back to this other athlete, I knew or thought I knew technique one way in 2016 when I began working with her. And then my understanding of technique in particularly in the past 3 years has completely evolved to the point where if my younger self saw me teaching the technique I teach now, they would be so stupefied by it that they would just be like, no, you're wrong.
Mm.
And if I saw the technique and the things my younger self was teaching 10 years ago, I'd be like, you need to be taken out back and shot. So it's that diametrically opposed on certain things
Hmm.
of changing the language and the improvement that I've made in the understanding of the lifts, that you know, even if you do make it formulaic, your formula only applies to your understanding of the lifts now and not the evolved understanding that you're going to have 3 years from now. Because if you aren't evolving in your understanding of the lifts, and you're not getting better as a coach, and therefore you're going to go the way of the dinosaurs, like so many coaches in weightlifting that have
Mm.
just uh, made themselves so stubborn that they have fallen to irrelevancy.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and so I think that is a problem of making it formulaic.
Right.
Now, that doesn't answer the question of how am I tracking their technique now? Um, it's still subjective, but it is a direct comparison of their technique now to their older videos, and then having a way of subjectively taking notes with every video review that you do.
Mm.
So I've got notebooks on notebooks of, as I'm reviewing videos, I'm writing stuff down, even if it's me saying the exact same thing. I've got one athlete, incredibly good lifter, right now number one seed for the U23 championships, and I've been telling her the exact same, like, hey, this is the flaw we have to fix, this is how we need to fix it. And then if she's not able to apply the corrections with what I'm saying to her, then I have to make it up with the movements that I'm giving her that force her into doing good technique.
Yeah.
um, a great example of this, different athlete, but uh, I had one of my athletes who always, and this is a constant battle for I think a lot of athletes, um, but she would, whenever she got to about 85% and up, she would overshift to the heels as the bar passed the knee. And then as it came up the thigh, in order to regain balance, the hips push forward at the bar. She whacks the bar at the hips, and away it goes out in front.
Mm.
And that because she was so flexible and mobile, all that would turn into is just the bar missing behind again and again and again and again. And I am not the coach that believes, oh, if you miss it behind, you can make it. No, that's a bunch of bullshit. If you can make it, then you would have made the lift.
Right.
Um, by the way, the coffee's kicking in, so this is what you're getting. But so what I did is I created and I looked up things that were like, hey, how do we force mid-foot pressure through the entirety of the lift?
Hmm.
And again, this is one of those things where we talk about, my understanding of the lifts have evolved uh, to a very large degree over the past couple of years, but it's also not new information. Like
Right.
what I'm learning about the lifts is not new information. For instance, we know that the elite lifters have always stayed mid foot with their pressure and only deviate by 1 to 2 centimeters through the entirety of the lift, all the way up through Olympic caliber lifters. And we've known that since 1980 because John Garhammer did the fucking research on it. Like that's not new information.
But at the
Um,
same time, there was, I'll have to find the paper. I don't think it was Stone. I can't remember
yep,
who did it.
Stone et al.
I don't know. I don't know if it was him though that looked at oh my God, I always mess these up. Kinematics, right?
Yeah.
Kinematics is without regard to force, correct? Just movement without, and then kinetics is movement with regard to the forces behind. Anyway, they were tracing the bar
One of
path.
the two. Yeah.
Yeah, they were tracing the bar path, and like they saw significant variation not only between athletes but also within athletes, right?
Yeah.
And within like attempts at like world record weights. So um I guess my point is that like we do at the elite level, we observe very significant deviation in technique. And
Oh yeah.
one of the big things that I coach, and I was just talking to someone about this, is the initial line where that bar starts, right over the ball of the
Hmm.
foot. I do not want the bar to cross that line, or if it does, just like marginally, right? But
Yep.
you see lifters at
Same.
the elite level that kick the bar off the floor. There's a swing of the bar away off the floor, and they're hitting world record weight. So it's like, you know, what?
But it, we also have to look, yes, that is occurring at elite level. And one of the things that I look at is that an outlier lift, or is that the majority of lifters are
Mm,
doing that? And then there was a discussion, and again, this is a anecdotal discussion, not a scientific paper, but there was a discussion by Max Ada with, I forget who he was speaking with it about how drug usage affects techniques. And we know that drugs are being
mm,
used by some of these other countries.
mm,
So they are able to be strong in positions that you're not normally strong in, and therefore they get to get away with less efficient technique than what we would see countries that we would think to be cleaner.
mm.
And I do believe America is cleaner because we are one of the only countries that tests its own athletes. Um,
Like ridiculously,
Ridiculous to an insane amount.
right?
The number of times CJ Cummings has been tested, it still boggles my mind when you see that. Go look that number up if you want to see something stupid. Um, so I think that should be considered as well. So when I look at countries that I believe to have really good technique and to be semi-clean, um, we see some very consistent things in technique. And then if we look at, in my opinion, it's well observed that the best technique right now, at least on snatch and clean pull, from the floor to what we would consider a power position, or floor to the hip, and then hip to extension, would be probably Lascia Taldice. I
Mm,
think
yeah.
it's widely regarded that his is the best, especially on snatch. What's How does he lift from the floor? He has your exact thing that you're saying, is that if I have my plumb line from where the bar starts, the plane in which the bar starts, and my athlete's on this side, the bar is going to break the floor and begin moving in toward the athlete. And it constantly moves in toward the athlete. And even at the point of explosion, because we're going to get forward deflection from the hip at the point of explosion, that forward deflection does not cross this
Hmm.
line. We're going to come up and in, we're going to get our point of explosion, but we're still staying on the same side of the plane in which the bar started as the athlete, even after the point of explosion, into the final extension and the pull underneath.
Hmm.
Um, so I think in that regard, if we look at that as our standard for technique, right? We look at that as our consistency standard for where the bar should be. Going back to this particular athlete that I was correcting with too much heel shift, when we began to correct the heel shift and pick specific exercises that did not allow her to go to the heels. For instance, an exercise that fit that bill for me was heels off deficit snatch pulls. So she's midfoot and forward on the riser, standing on the riser, and
Hmm.
staying there all the way through the snatch pull. And it was one of the things that drastically increased her consistency in the snatch, but
Hmm.
also drove the weight up. She has added, she did uh, 80 kilos at the WSO championship in February. And this is a 64 kilo lifter that's moving up to 71. This is her second sport. She had gone to Olympic trials even for another sport.
Hmm.
So she knows what it is to be an elite athlete. She did 80 there, 81 at AO finals, so improved by a kilo, and then 83 last weekend.
Hmm.
So has constantly improved 1 to 2 kilos every meet. Um, and then the other thing that has drastically improved is she's added um, about 7 kilos to her clean in that period of time. And again, this is an athlete. I did not start and initially develop this athlete. This athlete came to me with, a significant amount of training behind her already. So for us to be able to improve and define, the whole point of that is like, and going back to tracking technique and improving technique. Like, are we improving from looking at the movement visually in 20 we're in 2024, in 2022 when we were
Mm,
getting a lot of heel shift, to her third attempt at her last meet in 2024? Are we still shifting drastically to the heels? No. Did we make the lift? Yes. Does it look
mm,
significantly better? And are we walking forward on the lifts that we catch? No, we're standing straight up. We're
mm.
not making the center judge fear for their life. So that's, again, it's a subjective, not an objective or an operational way of tracking it, but we are able to see the
Mm,
technical improvement. And I think if you have a good coach's eye, you can see that improvement very well. Uh,
mm,
and I think that is one of the other things that we can get into, but the idea of a coach's eye and being able to improve what you're looking at and understand what you're looking at. I think too many people don't do enough time in that. And I think it might be the hyperfixation that I have through ADHD. But I'm able to look at a lift and immediately replay that lift in my brain
mm,
without looking at a phone. Like, I don't, like, if I'm just watching somebody lift in real time, I don't need a phone to replay it to see what went wrong, if they missed or made or whatever. Like,
right.
it's stuck in my brain. I see it, I can fix it and cue it and move on and get them to improve for the next lift. And I think that's something. I think that's a lost art. I think coaches have become too reliant on
On like
uh,
technology.
technology and phones and apps. I'm like, dude, if you can't watch a lift and
Hmm.
see what was absolutely screwed about it, then you need to put the phone down completely and just watch lifting at full speed. So,
There's still value though, and I think some of it
oh yeah,
goes to the athlete as well, right? If they send me a video and I track the bar path and I'm like, hey, look at what's going on here. That bar is, you can see the bar swinging forwards. I still think there is some value in using some stuff like that, but
oh, I mean,
I
like I
agree
said,
that, yeah,
yeah.
it comes down to reps, and like you said, just watching a ton of lifts over and over and starting to be able to like recognize patterns. So tell me, you mentioned that like in the past few years, the way you teach the lifts, the way you teach the technique has changed drastically. What are the kind of major things that have like changed for you, and what has led to that like shift?
And again, I think everything I'm about to say will probably sound standard to most folks. So I'm going to caveat this with like how we were teaching these things um, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, how we were teaching and learning them um, was inefficient compared to now, right? So it's more so I kind of caught up to the times, or caught up to like what is generally accepted for the lifts, than it was like um, this magic new thing, right? So going back to Glenn being one of the most influential pieces of my lifting, uh, he has I think everybody still teaches a lot of this, but he has a 3-step process to the snatch and the clean and jerk, right? You bend your knees, bars at the hip. That's position one. We often know it as power position. You hinge at the hips, you put the bar at the knee. That's position two. We just call it hang at the knee now. And then position three was bar was at mid shin or starting position on the floor, right? So position one, position two, position three. I even still use those positions when I coach, but what they were a little bit different. So initially, even when I was going through the process of shadowing to become a level one instructor, we would talk about position one, shoulders being behind the bar with the knees bent at the hips, bar at the hips. So torso perfectly vertical with shoulders to the point of being behind the bar. And then at the knees, we would talk about them being in front of the bar. And then at the start position, we would talk about shoulders being directly over the bar. In order to make a lot of that happen, you get a lot of shit, like that big weight shift in the foot that I was talking about, where you go from the floor to the knee and your weight shifts drastically to the heels, because you're almost trying. We used to teach to a point early on that the knees would go to a position behind the ankles when the
Mhm.
bar was reaching the knee. And that's just wholly incorrect, right? Because you can
Mhm.
no longer put pressure down into the floor if your knees are behind the ankles. So that was one of the things that went out to where now we get the bar to the knee. The shin should be vertical in relation to the ankle. That way we are still pressing through the middle of the foot into the floor. And then we used to talk about a scoop
Mhm.
with the hips. And I refuse. That was one of the words I threw out really early on. Like, that's not even the past couple of years, but like I stopped using that word in like 2014 because that was causing athletes to literally put like scoop around their hips underneath the bar
Yep.
in an effort to avoid the whack right away. So I got rid of that forever ago, but that was one of the things we used to teach. And then some of the other stuff was how we're getting underneath the bar,
Mhm.
um, and how active you need to be, and where you are locking out, or where you are meeting the bar in relation to the bottom of your squat. Where, and again, this is something I took from Glenn he said it once, and I just latched onto it like a toddler with a toy that I wouldn't let go. And it took me a while to understand. It actually took me understanding the usage of the Olympic lifts for sport to understand we should not be hitting the bottom of the squat and meeting the bar at the same time.
Right.
Glenn viewed that as, or would talk about that. And again, I'm disparaging what he taught, but like there are so many other things that I learned from him that uh, made me a much better coach, and why I say he had the biggest influence on my lifting in a positive way. Um,
Yeah.
but he would tell a story of a guy named Caleb Ward, a weightlifter named Caleb Ward, where when he was in his teens, his first 400-pound front squat and his first 400-pound deadlift happened in the same week, and then a week later he cleaned it. And Glenn put it together as well, if you can deadlift it, you can get it to your hip. All you got to do is just be fast enough to get underneath it. Well, one of the things with Caleb Ward is his back was so damn strong that he could just hit the bottom of that squat and absorb the weight of the bar in a dead squat. And most people
Mhm.
can't do it. So one of the things that, especially at the courses we teach now, is the idea of force attenuation, of receiving the bar and fixating it a little bit above the bottom of the squat, and then allowing your legs to help you decelerate. That idea of kind of triple braking or
Mhm.
triple eccentric loading with the knees, the hips, and the ankles as you go into the bottom of the squat before standing up, whether it's a snatch or a clean. And that's one of the things I really focus on that I used to not focus on. It was just like speed under the bar means speed dead into the hole.
Mhm.
And I think that's a thing that is still broken with how CrossFit teaches it, because it's like just get down into the hole. Like
Yeah.
I need to, the word drop under the bar. Whenever I
Drop.
hear somebody,
Yep.
whenever I hear somebody say drop under the bar, I'm going to stab them in the neck. Like
Yeah.
you have lost speaking privileges for the remainder of the day if you say drop.
Yeah.
Um, so those are some of the big things that I always kind of knew weren't working, but I didn't know how to fix. And then I just had some light bulb movements coming through. And then finally, and I saved this one for last, was I never used to use the word or the term stay over the bar.
Mm.
And here's why. So when I was in Colorado, I saw a flaw that I never saw on the East Coast. And I don't know why it was this way, but it was. And it was the hitch. And we all know what the
Mm.
CrossFit hitch is. They come up, they get the knees fully straight, the bar is all the way into the hip, and they're like in this position instead of knees bent, their knees dead straight, almost at a 90 degree with their torso relative to the floor, and the bar is here in the hip, and they do that number, right? And they
Mhm.
throw their hip as hard as they can into it, and it like the bar comes to a dead on freaking stop at
Right.
the hip, and then they kettlebell swing that sucker away from them. And I never saw that when I was coaching on the East Coast before going to Colorado. I had literally never encountered that flaw as a coach. I'd seen other people do it on videos and whatever. I'm like, oh, that's kind of screwy, but let's not do that. But I never figured out how to coach it. So my solution to coaching it was getting rid of the term "stay over the bar," because
Mhm.
in my mind, as a young coach, well, they're just staying over the bar too long and therefore creating a hitch. And I didn't understand staying over the bar to staying in the legs.
Mhm.
Okay. So the cue I used then was staying in the legs, which was basically the same thing as staying over the bar, just different part of the body. So I wasn't completely stupid. I was close to it, but not completely stupid as a young coach. Um, and then the past couple of years, I began to understand staying over the bar and staying in the legs and being able to use that cue of kind of keeping the chest over the bar as it comes up and off the floor, and using that analogy of the pull from the floor to past the knees, or the movement of the bar from the floor past the knees, is basically an upside down leg press, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
if you take a leg press machine with the leg sled, and you flip that upside down, they're
Yep.
just pushing that back angle away from the floor, thereby staying over the bar. And when that light bulb happened, I instantly became a better coach. When
Mhm.
I understood the importance and understood really what staying over the bar meant, that's when I drastically became a better technique coach. And that was something that happened, 2019, 2020, somewhere in there, maybe 2021. Um, with
Yeah.
everything
I
post COVID being a blur, but that was like I had taken an extreme measure
Mhm.
against that cue and that thought process to solve a problem, the CrossFit hitch, instead of helping athletes understand what staying over the bar really means. So then I figured out what staying over the bar really means, and now I can solve that down the line. So
Yeah, I literally just posted a video today of a girl I'm working with. She's like brand new. She's a CrossFitter, longtime CrossFitter, and she's got that CrossFit hitch, which you just described. And like that's the thing with coaching and like coaching the lifts is triaging, right? What's the most important? Where do we start and what do we fix first? And for her, I'm like, use your freaking legs. Push with your legs. If you use your legs, you're not going to get that hyperextension of the knees with the shoulders moving like too far in front of the bar. And then that reflexive like swinging action, and she was able to pick that up like immediately in the first session. And bar's still a little bit forwards, like there's still work to do, but just that cue of like you said, kind of staying in the legs, pushing, driving with the legs, allowed her to keep a much better position throughout the lift. And the scoop thing, I've also never been a big fan of that. Um, Something I played around with like coaching from that position above the knee is like telling people to think more about jumping, right? Like if you go from that position above the knee and you think about literally jumping with the barbell, you're going to get that rebend, right? You're going to get that flexion of the knee and then extension as you come back up. It's kind of like a natural intuitive movement. And I agree that sometimes with coaching the scoop, you see like the Ramat clean, right? Ramat literally
yes,
like he
yeah.
like changes directions and like scoops underneath the bar and extends up. And it's really weird, awkward pull, but obviously he's strong as fuck and able to get
Well,
away with it.
He's passed all his drug tests, so I don't know how applicable this is, but we know some of those countries have a history with, specifically looking at him, have a history with drug usage he may have used in the past. But when you are strong enough, and again, let's take the drug usage out of it. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe I'm tossing accusations with no basis. Um, so I don't want to do that. But when we look at somebody who's just raw strong, which he is, right?
Mhm.
You get away with certain things technique wise, and I think that's one of the things for him, that he's so strong in a position compared to all of his peers who are not as strong in that position, so they can't get away with that particular method of technique, not calling it a flaw, just calling it a method of technique. So it's something that's specific to him for a reason. Going back to the technique of there were two things that you mentioned. One was the individual with the hitch,
Mhm.
um, And you're right, staying in the legs. And I would say one of the things that I have also found that really causes that CrossFit hitch is that overshift to the heels, because all
Hmm.
they ever hear is heels, 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 heels.
Yep.
And one of the big things I constantly teach is get your damn weight out of your damn heels.
Hmm.
Um, Stop setting up like that. Stop pulling and shifting to them. Just don't do it. You've got two options. You can either teach push whole foot, which um, that doesn't work. If you're so used to pushing with the heels, when I say push whole foot, all that's going to tell you to do is just keep your foot flat and then push through your heels.
Hmm.
Um, so I teach get midfoot, get forward of the ankle with your balance,
Yep.
and almost to an extreme, get to ball of foot
Yeah.
and drive. And that's typically where the pressure is for most of my athletes when they start. You also said one of the words that makes me want to rage quit, and that is jump. And I refuse to teach jump. I refuse to teach that when I coach weightlifting,
Hmm.
because fucky things happen, right? I say the word jump, and I refuse to say jump, and I refuse to say shrug. If you had
Hmm.
followed up with shrug, I would have rage quit. You would have never been able to post this. I'm like, I will not affiliate with this dude. No,
Uh,
I think coaches, and I've softened up on the word jump by other coaches, but I still refuse to use it myself.
hmm.
Um, and that is because one of the big things that happens, at least when I teach adults jump, it happens no matter what when I teach kids jump. But when I teach adults, most of them will start the jump from the ankles,
Hmm.
and that's a problem. So when I, and this is another thing, and I've always really taught this without, uh, like this wasn't a big technique change. This was just something that I picked up from my time learning from Glenn and some of these other individuals. Uh, the pull isn't a pull. Um, and I think that is something that's really important to the understanding of the technique of weightlifting is the pull is
100%.
not a pull.
Yeah.
It's a drive. It's a leg push.
It's a leg
Um,
extension. Yeah.
it's a leg extension. It's a knee
Yeah.
extension. It's a leg drive. It's a leg push. So and that's one of the things that's actually going on the next batch of Butcher Barbell t-shirts is drive like hell.
Hmm.
Um, because that's what it is you are driving like hell against the platform with the legs. You're not really pulling. Pulling indicates that it's a hamstring heavy movement similar to a deadlift. It's hamstring and glutes, and that's not what it is. There's a reason why weightlifters have quads that don't fit into jeans. It's because when we're squatting, we're using our quads, and when we're lifting off the ground, we're using our quads. So the thing is a puller, it's a drive from the floor all the way through. The pull, the only time I view it as pulling is when we're actually descending underneath the barbell, is one of the things that I teach athletes in order to descend faster is actively leg curl at your knees to
Mm.
use your hamstrings to pull yourself down. So
Hmm.
that's how I teach athletes to get under the bars, using their knees like a leg curl and their ass like an anchor to pull them underneath the bar. So yeah, so that there's my soapbox moment, my rage quit moment for
And that
you.
the yeah, the EMG data corroborates that. So that's like I was heavily influenced by Louis Simmons, went out and trained with him, did
Mhm.
an internship with him and kind of trained consistently over a few years at Westside. Learned a lot, took a lot of great information from him, but obviously, there's no one's perfect. And like his big thing was like weightlifters have these huge quads. They need to develop like hamstrings, and like it's more of like a hamstring dominant movement, which is not true. Like the EMG data shows that like high quad activity off the floor, right? More hamstring activity, like kind of around that transition as the bar sweeping back, and then more quad and glute activity as you're extending up. So uh, you're absolutely right, and I teach the same way that it's essentially a squat, really off the floor. It's like a concentric squat where you're pushing the platform away from you.
Absolutely, and I don't get me wrong. And I've read, tried to read. I needed a lot of caffeine to get through it. Because
Lu-
Lou is
Lu-
such a smart guy, but when it
oh,
comes
dude,
to
he's
writing, not
he's
the
a
best.
horrible writer. He writes just
God,
like he talks, which is like all over
yeah,
the place. Yeah.
yeah. I heard his voice as I was reading, and I had the old, not the current West Side Book of Methods. the
Yeah.
old conjugate system books from the early aughts and 90s, right?
Hmm.
The ones where he was still talking like, hey, if you're on drugs, you take this, you train this way. If you're not on
Hmm.
drugs, you train this way. Like those are the books I got to read, and it hurt my brain real bad. Um, but I would agree with him. Well, yeah, it is a drive. It is a leg drive. Period. End of story. Sorry, Louis, you're wrong. It is not a hamstring driven movement. But Louis, you're absolutely right. Weightlifters need more hamstrings.
Yes, agreed.
And if
Yeah.
you look, if we get into the nuances of my program, one of the things I train a lot of is hamstring work in order to make the transition from the knee to the hip uh, a little bit stronger.
Hmm.
And then I train a lot of glute work because the easiest way that I describe what the glutes do to people is I'm like, are you standing up or are you bent over? If you're standing up, you have glutes. They're
Hmm.
activated. Period. End of story. You don't need to go through a 20-minute glute activation process unless you are literally falling over on the floor and having to walk like a knuckle dragging gorilla. Okay. So
Hmm.
you have a butt, it's working. Now you just need it to make it stronger because that's what's actually holding your position. Your ass is holding that flat back position. So I hit a lot of hamstring work, both uh, knee flexion hamstring work as well as hip hinging hamstring work. And for my athletes, at least twice a week, they get directed good mornings, RDLs, leg curls, uh, as much variation as I can possibly get in their hamstring work. I get it. In addition to everything else. And I think that is something that Louis does identify really well in that statement of like, no, it's not the driver of the movement. It's not a hamstring driven movement. But if your hamstrings are stronger, you can hold position better and
Hmm.
apply more force with the quads.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the reasons why in my own lifting, I've always been very hamstring strong. As a crappy little CrossFitter, I was deadlifting, I had a body weight to deadlift ratio. I was 2.5 to 2.75 times my body weight on my deadlift, which for a CrossFitter is pretty absurd at the time. And I carried that hamstring strength through. And I think that's the reason why I was able to get away with a lot of the technique errors and flaws I had in my early career and be able to snatch the way that I did. I was not a traditional snatcher. I was a split snatcher. And I think that comes out of the fact that I was so strong from being able to hold the position, and then so strong as the bar crossed the knee of being
Hmm.
able to just rocket that sucker into power position.
Hmm.
Um, so
Have, have you ever used his inverse curl machine?
the inverse curl machine,
It's
no.
the Nordic hamstring curl machine.
Oh,
So
Nordic hamstring curl, no.
yeah, it's the assisted. It's got a bar here, and then it's got like a pendulum with weight on it. So like that thing's brilliant. That's like it's so expensive and it's such like a niche piece of equipment. But if you can get access to that thing, like I don't know of a better machine that like helps develop hamstring strength. And the Nordic curl is like there's a lot of good data on that in terms of like um
Yeah,
improving hamstring strength and reducing like incidence of injury.
there's one of those machines. I want to say Strength Empire in Charlotte has one of
Hmm.
them. And if I'm not mistaken, we may have even had one at the University Recreation Center at Charlotte, but I can't remember at the university because we had one of the most ridiculous URECs you've ever seen.
Hmm.
Uh, it was like 5 stories for a gym. It was
Wow.
nuts. Um, and each story had like a different purpose. But no, I've seen that machine, and once you described it, I knew what you were talking about. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the Nordic curls. I'm a big fan of GH raises on the
Right.
GHD machine.
Hmm.
Big fan of hip extensions. A big fan. One of the things that I'm also big on is just straight up back strength, lower
Hmm.
back strength.
Yep.
Um, Sorry, our backs were meant to flex and extend, and the only way to get better at extension is moving it through flexion. Um, the guy with the foot fetish on Instagram that keeps talking about how you should never bend your back can
which
kind of
which which is funny because like it's been so like hip
You
and
know exactly who I'm talking about
oh
too.
yeah, yeah. Obviously. Hip and spinal flexion are coupled movements, right? So
Yeah.
again, data's been done on the kinematics of like the spine and the hip in a squat, and even in people that look superficially like they're maintaining lumbar extension in the bottom of the squat, there is up to, I can't remember the number, but it's like up to like 60 to like 80% of like max flexion that occurs in the bottom of the
Yeah.
squat at the spine, at the lumbar spine, right? So the
Yeah.
lumbar spine does move. It flexes and extends with everything, like all the movements that we do. So I agree, it's not something that should be avoided. And that was something that like Louis was big on, was like working in a rounded position, doing rounded deadlifts, rounded good mornings. Um, I'm careful with those things, not
Hmm.
because they are dangerous and like they will cause injury, but if someone has underlying sensitivity or they're dealing with like a back issue, that's probably going to be the thing that lights them up, right? And then they'll be like, "Oh, that was the thing. Like that exercise fucked me up." It's a classical thing with like people say they hurt their backs deadlifting. It's like the incidence of injury of like acute injury in like strength sports is incredibly low, and
Oh, I love.
the
Have you
possibility, huh?
the study from '96? I constantly refer to from it was that British study where it was like the instance of injury for weightlifting per 100 participant hours is 0.00017,
Yeah.
and then it was double that if you were just doing unsupervised weight training, and then it
Mhm.
was like quadruple that for cross country, right? Like the
Yeah,
incidence for
exactly.
injury in strength sport is ridiculously low. Sorry, but that study just came to mind. You're
Yeah.
better at quoting studies than I am, but I know that one really well. Um, but I think you're right. Like I think it's, you don't get hurt. You don't hurt your back deadlifting. Your back was already hurt, and then you deadlifted at a capacity that you didn't have to deadlift, and it
Right.
just highlighted your hurt back. Um, and I think going into the rounded stuff that Louis does, like I don't do a lot of the rounded back stuff in my programming, but one of the things I do use pretty significantly and pretty regularly are Jefferson curls and back
Yeah.
extensions, like a true back extension where
Yep.
it is here. And then one of my favorite new exercises, not new, but one of my favorite exercises is a T spine extension with a medicine ball on the bottom of the squat. So they get in the bottom of the
Mm.
squat, hugging a medicine ball, like one of the big wall balls, the Dynamax balls, and then curling at the T spine, at the C spine, T spine, and upper uh, lumbar spine, and then coming back up and fixing that posture in the holding the bottom of the squat where they're in that most sensitive position of something going wrong in the lifts.
Mm.
And I do train it, uh, that rounded to extended back position pretty regularly
Yeah.
for me and for all of my athletes. Like they get back, my athletes get back extensions 2 to 3 times a week. Period. End of story. Like,
Yeah.
hey, guess what's one accessory movement that you're never getting rid of? It's
Yeah.
back extension or a variation of it loaded. So, um, sorry,
Yeah.
continue.
No, no,
Didn't mean
yeah,
to interrupt.
you're good. You gotta, I mean, you gotta have a strong back as a weightlifter, and that's something that I definitely took from Louis and implement in like my athletes training. So we're kind of we're getting close here, but let's try to, if you
Yeah,
got some time, let's touch
yeah.
on one more thing here. So you mentioned that like your athletes programming wise, they're kind of in this like off season, right? So
Hmm.
it sounds to me like you go through these phases of like kind of off season hypertrophy, like laying down a foundation and then going into more specific like competition prep and stuff like that. One of the things that I got from Steve and that I kind of implement with my athletes is not letting athletes get out of shape, right? So his style is like we're going to consistently be hitting the classical lifts at relatively high intensities and really not going through these phases of like lower intensity, higher volume. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know every coach is different, has like different philosophies, but talk me through like kind of your what led you to like the approach that you're using.
I used to be in that same boat where it was and that influence actually came both from Glenn and from Louis, was that at any time of the year, we want to be able to hit 95%, right? Like
Mm,
Louis's whole system is built on the conjugate system is built on the idea like I can do a meet every 3 weeks, right? Like
mm,
that was the initial basis, was like we're just going to stay in shape year round. The more that I did that, the more burned out I found I was getting athletes, and that
mm,
it was shortening their time in the sport, at least under my training. Like
mm,
they would not stick in the sport as long. And then as I began to really understand seasons, even before going back to school and finishing my degree, which is when I really understood periodization. The idea of biasing things, like how I program
mm.
now, came out of the idea of biasing things during different programming cycles. And you can use that where you stay in shape year round, but you're biasing technical flaws
Right.
as you're doing that. For instance, these 4 weeks, we're going to fix floor to the knee, and then the next 4 weeks we're going to fix floor to the hip, and then the next 4 weeks we're going to fix hip to underneath the bar, and wash, rinse, repeat. So I had that, and I just was finding a little bit uh, higher incidence of injury, and then athletes just weren't as strong as I wanted them to be.
Mhm,
I was having a hard time getting them strong, like moving squat numbers, moving pull numbers, moving press numbers, and moving snatch, clean, jerk numbers at the same time. I
right.
just found I couldn't do it all at once. So that's kind of what led me to the current model of periodization that I have, where after a big meet, they 100% get like some sort of an off season. And what that off season looks like is just we're still snatching, clean and jerking up to about 85%,
Mm,
90% once a week. By the end of, I should say, by the end of the block, for instance, that the heaviest percentage most of them have week one of their off season is like 75%, right? Like
mm,
that's, we're taking some time to recover, because all of them just, it's not just the meet that they just did where they maxed out completely and blew everything out of the water, but it was like for weeks leading up to that, we were in that 85 to 95 to 100%, or really 85 to 100% for our percentages for
mhm,
like 4 to 6 weeks leading up to that, until we're finally peaking at like 100+%, so 100 to 105%. They needed a break, right? And
mm,
what I was finding is I would run one off season per year, and it always came after the state championship in October, which was perfect timing, because you had a couple athletes moving on to AO final, but it wasn't the majority, and then everybody else was moving into the off season, and they would be able to take that, and then they could eat food and be happy, and
mm.
do Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then okay, New Year's. Your off season was keeping you in shape enough that we can start training you up again after the new year. So that's when the first idea of an off season was born for me, and then it turned into okay, off season. I cannot train a lot of strength endurance and hypertrophy work at the same time as doing 95% snatch singles.
Mhm,
Um, so the off season became an opportunity to do 80 to 85% at the top end in complexes, but a lot of legitimate like bodybuilding. Like, hey, we
yeah.
need to. I've got athletes that I literally just need to have them do curls and tricep extensions because I need more meat around their elbows to keep their elbows safe.
Mm,
I've got athletes that like, hey, um, you get tired and you need 4 minutes to recover between sets at a meet, and I can't give you 4 minutes. So you're getting longer sets with shorter rest at lower percentages to be able to build up a little bit of endurance. And by the way, that sled out there, you and it are now best friends. Um, so that became an off season. Usually what I'll do is you get about 4 weeks of that. That's
mm,
typical of what I do, and then we're starting to build back into being weightlifters again. My masters athletes and my youth athletes get a little bit longer one. And why those? Masters, because I need more hypertrophy.
mhm,
It's harder for them to keep muscle on them. So I want to run that hypertrophy a little, train a little bit longer, so that they can hang on to some of that muscle mass, because you're not actually creating hypertrophy in 4 weeks. Even
mhm,
8 weeks, you're not really creating like long lasting hypertrophy. It takes 6 months to do it. But I can at least build a base of an adaptation to the stimulus of the higher sets and shorter rest, that I can carry that into the rest of their training into the meet. And then youth athletes, again, 6 months it takes them to really create, real hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but because their hormones are so high, I've got my youth athlete that's going to nationals. Um, the kid that's put 70 plus kilos on his total in a year, in 10 months, not even a year. Um, because he's never going to have higher testosterone than right now. I want to take as much advantage to like the testosterone and the growth hormone response and all that, and design the
Mm-hmm.
training around that, so that he can fill his weight class out and even move up. Like he's a year ago. Here's the thing with this kid. A year ago, he was shorter than me,
Mm-hmm.
and now he's 2 inches taller than me. And we've thankfully, so as he's gone up, we've moved him up a weight class. We started in 81 a year ago, and last week he was 90 kilos. Um, for his last meet, and he's probably going to settle into a 96 for the rest of his youth career, and then his senior career is going to be at 102.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's I'm taking advantage of that longer hypertrophy period, and it's not off season. They're not doing anything. It's
Yeah.
hypertrophy season, or I call it jacked and pale season, for the athletes. So we go from that. And then the other thing that I would agree with Steve, your Steve, is that I do not want them out of shape, in that I don't want their accessory work does not disappear or go down
Mm-hmm.
as we get closer to meets.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be the 3 days before the meet still doing banded pull aparts and single arm presses and single leg Bulgarians and back extensions 4 days out from a meet, 3 days out from a meet.
Mm-hmm.
So that stuff sticks with them all the way until they're on the platform, to make sure that we are hitting those smaller things, and you know keeping the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
It just, after the off season, you have that inverse relationship. Some of that stuff comes down in reps and intensity as we crank up the reps and intensity of um, the squats, presses, snatch, clean, and jerk.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of my philosophy there. And uh, to build out kind of what we're doing right now, they just came off of the QCC, which was Queen City Classic at Sean and Taylor's gym. Huge meet, 100 lifters. It's one of the meets that's always on our calendar,
Mm-hmm.
and we always go to it. It's always a fun time. Two platform meet really gets kind of wild. Every athlete, we had 19 athletes in that meet.
Mm-hmm.
Butcher Barbell had 19 athletes, so we were the second largest team that participated in the meet on that day. Um, Next big meet is October 19 and 20. That's our WSO championship. So we're 23 weeks out from that. So I get to give them like 8 weeks of stuff that,
Mm-hmm.
4 to 8 weeks of stuff that can build the base for handling the load that we're going to have to give them, or handling the training that we're going to have to give them to peak them for WSO championship. So we're going to get 4 to 8 weeks of that. Then we're going to get 4 to 8 weeks of strength building, using that hypertrophy to build up some raw strength of um, squat and press, and being able to handle the heavier loads with the legs in the overhead position. And then we're going to get into the technical work. And
Mm-hmm.
usually, like, I'll have, like, let's say if I'll take I'm trying to pull an athlete out of my head. Um, my athlete Corey's a college student, so he's still young enough that he's in that peak testosterone range, getting massive gains, 40 kilos on his total in the past year, but it's his first year of weightlifting, so that's kind of typical. Um, and we're gonna have him he jammed his wrist, had a little bit of a wrist jam at the meet. And that's
Mm-hmm.
usually what happens, is nobody leaves a meet unscathed. Something squirrely always happens at a meet, and the off season after a meet lets me rehab the injuries without being like, all right, tape that bitch up because you got to snatch and clean jerk this week. So it's letting me give him 2 to 4 weeks of pulls and squats to rehab the wrist, and then he's going to get for him, he's going to get go into probably a squat cycle, and then with the squat cycle, we're going to be focusing on um, you know 5 to 7 reps on squat, heavy percentage, and then go into some of the technical improvements on the snatch and the clean and jerk. And then he's going to go into the sport specific phase, which should be about, if I did my math right, should be about 8 weeks to carry him into the meet. Maybe I think it's 10 weeks, something like that, the way I did my math on it. So he'll have 2 4-week blocks of very sport specific training. Well, we're still increasing strength, but we're working that 80 to 95% really over those blocks for his lifts. He'll get a max out day in each one of those months
Mm,
to see if we've moved the needle appropriately to create some new PRs. And then I'll have a 2 week peak into the meet. And that's kind of typically how I would run it for him.
gotcha. Gotcha. Well, awesome, dude. I think we should probably call this here. I mean,
Yes.
honestly, dude, I definitely want to do this again. I think there's a lot more that we could get into.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
this has been super valuable for me, and hopefully, other people will find value in it as well. A couple of highly educated coaches sitting down and duking it out. So, I appreciate it. Any last closing thoughts?
I think you said duking it out. I think my last closing thought is I think we have found that we agree way more than we disagree on a lot of
Yeah.
this stuff.
That's
And I think
maybe it was a poor choice of words. Sorry.
no,
Fleshing out some
I
ideas. Yeah.
don't think that's a poor choice of words at all, because that's usually what happens when two coaches that get together is they
Hmm.
do wind up duking it out. But I think what we've seen here is that coaches will agree more than they disagree on a lot of stuff.
For sure. For sure.
And I think that's one of the things that athletes and coaches alike can take away is that that coach that probably annoys the hell out of you with what they do, you and him probably agree on a lot more than you think you do,
Yeah.
and are probably a lot similar than you think you are. So I think that's the takeaway is that you are probably a lot closer to these other coaches than you think, and then uh, you should be learning constantly as a
Agreed.
coach. I think one of the things that I made clear in this podcast is I had a distinct evolution over my coaching career to become a better coach, and I think every coach, if you want to avoid drifting into irrelevancy, you have to constantly evolve and change what you're doing,
For
or
sure.
grow what you're doing and grow your understanding. You don't have to change it wholesale, but you need to grow and improve. This was an absolute blast, and I absolutely hope we do this again. You've got to learn to tell me to shut up sometimes, because I'll get up on that soapbox and just roll on.
Hey, I'm
I
gassing up
definitely
that
took
fire,
away.
man.
Please do. I'm definitely taking away some more stuff that I want to begin to track a little bit,
Yeah.
and especially in the readiness to train, and being able to track pain levels with athletes when I'm helping them come back and return to sport after tweaking something.
Mm.
But yeah, man, thank you. I appreciate this. This was super valuable for me too.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And thanks for anyone that was listening in, and we'll have to do this again sometime soon.
All right, brother.